The alarm went off at 5:47 a.m. Ethan Calloway had been awake since 5:30. He lay still for a moment, listening to the house. The creak of the hallway floorboard, the one that always groaned, even when no one walked on it. Just the house settling into morning. The faint hiss of the refrigerator cycling on in the kitchen below. And from down the hall, the soft, unconscious breathing of his daughter, Lily, still asleep in the room with the purple curtains and the constellation nightlight that rotated slow constellations across the ceiling, even after she'd grown too old to need it. She still needed it. He got up quietly. That was the governing logic of every morning, quietly. Don't wake her. She needed sleep more than he did. He moved through the dim hallway in the practiced silence of a man who had learned how to be invisible in his own home. Downstairs, he made coffee. 2 scoops. Black. He stood at the kitchen window while it brewed and looked at the backyard. The oak tree he'd been meaning to trim for 3 years, the rope swing that Lily no longer used, but that neither of them could bring themselves to take down. The grass was wet with dew. A single crow sat on the fence post at the far end of the yard, watching him with that particular crow intelligence that always felt like judgment. Ethan drank his coffee standing up. At 38, Ethan Calloway was not a man anyone would describe as unhappy. He had a job he was good at, structural engineering for a mid-size firm downtown. The kind of work that asked for precision and left little room for emotion. He had a modest house in a quiet neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. He had a 2019 pickup truck that ran well. He had Lily. He did not have anything else, and he had made his peace with that. The peace had cost him something, but he'd paid it. 6 years ago, when Rebecca died quietly, in the way that cancer sometimes chose, without the drama that a person might expect. Just a gradual dimming something in Ethan had recalibrated. Not broken. He was careful about the word broken. People said it too easily. He had recalibrated, like a compass that had been jostled, and now pointed somewhere slightly different than true north. He still functioned. He still laughed, sometimes. He still had friends, though he saw them infrequently. He coached Lily's soccer team for 2 seasons, until the schedule became unmanageable. He read. He fixed things. He had a talent for fixing things. Mechanical and structural, things that could be diagnosed and corrected. He did not pursue new relationships. Not because he had decided against it, exactly. More because the threshold for it had simply become very high. The cost-benefit analysis, done unconsciously every time someone showed interest, always came back the same. The potential reward did not justify the particular kind of exposure that intimacy required. He had already lost the person he'd chosen to be exposed to. He was not willing to start the exposure over. This was not something Ethan articulated to himself in those terms. He just knew he was not looking. Had not been looking for 6 years. And in the absence of looking, he had become very good at not noticing. Lily was 8 when Rebecca died. She was 14 now. She was, by any measure, a remarkable child, though Ethan was aware this was a biased assessment. She was quiet in the way that certain intelligent people are quiet. She observed first, spoke second, and said things that occasionally stopped adults mid-sentence. She had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubbornness, and a particular sense of humor that tended toward dry and landed perfectly. She did not talk about her mother often. When she did, it was straightforward. Mom used to do it this way, or Mom would have thought that was funny, with a matter-of-factness that Ethan sometimes found easier and sometimes found devastating, depending on the day. They had a rhythm, the two of them. It worked. It was enough. He had made it enough through sheer discipline. The mornings were the easiest, the coffee, the crow on the fence post, the quiet mechanics of preparing for a day. The evenings were harder. After Lily went to bed, the house settled into itself, with a particular quality of stillness that was not peaceful so much as it was simply the absence of noise, which was not the same thing. He filled those hours with reading, with the occasional project replacing a window seal, repainting the hallway, the never-ending project of the backyard fence, with the kind of purposeful busyness that looked, from the outside, like contentment. He had learned that grief did not announce itself. It did not come on schedule, or in the shapes people expected. It arrived sideways, in the moment when he found himself reaching for his phone to tell someone about something funny that had happened, and remembering that the person he'd always told was gone. In the moment when he drove past the restaurant where he and Rebecca used to go for their anniversary, not thinking about it, and then suddenly did think about it, and had to sit at the red light for an extra cycle, because his vision had blurred unexpectedly. He did not allow himself to stay in those moments longer than necessary. He had built a life that kept moving, and movement was the thing that kept the stillness from being unbearable. Or it had been. Clara Whitfield had known Ethan Calloway for 5 years, before she allowed herself to understand what that knowing meant. She had met him in the context of Lily, which was how most people met Ethan, through the small orbit of his daughter. Because Lily was the only part of his life he was genuinely open about. Clara was a pediatric nurse practitioner at the clinic where Lily had come in at age 9 with a persistent cough that turned out to be nothing serious. And then again at 10 with a broken wrist from a fall at school, and again at 11 for her annual physical, when Ethan had forgotten to schedule it until 3 weeks past due, and arrived looking like a man who had run a small internal war and was losing. Clara had been calm with him. She was always calm. It was one of her baseline qualities. The kind of calm that wasn't vacant or passive, but was instead deeply load-bearing. The kind that other people unconsciously leaned against. She had given him the forms. She had explained the procedure for the wrist. She had caught Lily's eye when Lily was trying not to cry from the X-ray technician's cold hands, and had made a face, just a small one, conspiratorial. I know, it's terrible, that made Lily exhale instead of cry. Ethan had noticed. He thanked her at the end of that visit with the particular sincerity of a man who didn't thank people casually, and Clara had said of course and gone back to her work, and thought about nothing in particular on her drive home. Then she'd met him again at the Carmichael's block party that June, because Portland neighborhoods were small that way, and she'd learned he lived 4 streets over, and they'd talked for 40 minutes about structural engineering and pediatric nursing, and the surprising overlap between the two. Both were fundamentally about understanding what things were made of and where they were likely to fail. She'd driven home thinking about that conversation. Then thinking about him. She had not rushed toward the conclusion. She was 35, a woman who had learned to be careful with her own feelings. Not repressive, but careful, the way you're careful with something that has weight. She had been in 2 serious relationships that ended without bitterness, but without continuation either. And she understood by now that she was the kind of person who fell slowly and then stayed put, which was either a virtue or a liability depending on the situation. With Ethan, it had been slow. And then, somewhere in the 3rd year of knowing him, it had been unambiguous. She did not act on it. There were good reasons not to. He was clearly not looking. The grief he carried was not dramatic. He wasn't drowning in it, but it was structural, woven into the way he moved through the world. And Clara had enough clinical experience to know that grief like that had its own timeline and couldn't be negotiated with. She also genuinely cared about Lily, and the thought of introducing something uncertain into Lily's life felt irresponsible, and so she had stayed. In the comfortable and quietly unbearable middle distance of friendship. She brought soup when Lily had the flu. She texted Ethan when she saw an article about a bridge project his firm had worked on. She let herself be drawn into the irregular dinners that happened when Lily invited her over without particularly consulting Ethan, and that Ethan allowed with a tolerance that might have been indifference and might have been something else. She had stopped trying to diagnose which. She had turned down 2 people in the last 3 years who had asked her out. Both of them were perfectly reasonable. She had offered herself perfectly reasonable explanations for the refusals. She had also, in one honest moment, late on a Tuesday night, admitted to her journal that she was waiting. Not waiting for him to change or to heal or to become someone different, just waiting in the way you wait for something that might happen or might not, with patience and without certainty and with the occasional, necessary grief of her own. She had not told anyone this, not even her closest friend, Diane, who would have immediately formed an opinion and a plan and a short list of action items, because Diane approached everything in life, including other people's emotions, with the decisive efficiency of someone who had never once been paralyzed by indecision Clara loved Diane for this. She also knew that Diane's particular brand of helpfulness would reframe waiting into something that required intervention, and Clara did not want it reframed. She wanted it respected, and so she kept it interior, this patient, complicated thing she'd been carrying, and she carried it alone, which was sometimes fine and sometimes, in the late hours when the apartment was quiet and the certainty of her own reasonableness felt thin, was something else entirely. She kept it, like most of the things that mattered to her, interior and quiet. What nobody named, and what therefore had enormous power, was the way their two lives had arranged themselves around each other. It happened gradually, as most significant things do, through the accumulation of small, ordinary moments that none of them would have cited as evidence of anything, if asked. Lily had started it, or rather, Lily had simply stated it, in the way children state the things adults are careful to leave unstated. Clara should just come for dinner, she had announced on a Thursday afternoon, at age 12, in the car after Clara had met them at the clinic for a checkup. She's already here, and I bet she hasn't eaten. Ethan had glanced in the rearview mirror at his daughter, with the expression of a man who recognized he was being managed. Clara has her own. I haven't eaten, Clara had said, and that was how it started. Dinner became a semi-regular thing. Not scheduled, Lily was clever enough not to push for schedule, which would have triggered Ethan's reflexive caution, but frequent enough that it acquired the texture of normalcy. Clara brought wine when she came. Ethan grilled things, because grilling was the category of cooking he was both willing and competent to perform. Lily presided over the kitchen like a small general, directing both of them with an authority that was mostly charming and occasionally exhausting. On the nights Clara was there, Ethan was more relaxed. Not demonstrably, he wasn't a demonstrative person, but in small calibrations. He laughed more easily. He asked questions that had follow-up questions. He forgot to check his phone. Clara noticed these things and filed them without conclusions. Lily had taken up drawing the previous winter, and Clara had made the mistake or the gift, depending on how you measured, of mentioning that she'd studied art in high school and still occasionally sketched. Lily had seized on this with characteristic single-mindedness, and for 3 months, Wednesday evenings had become drawing sessions at the kitchen table, with Lily's work spreading across the butcher block surface, and Clara's patient instructions competing with the sound of Ethan working in the adjacent room, sanding something, or reading, or just being present in a way that had no name but a specific quality of warmth. Clara had fixed Ethan's leaking bathroom faucet once, because she knew plumbing from years of maintaining an old apartment, and he had fixed her car's weather stripping, because weather stripping was nothing compared to what he dealt with professionally. They had developed a comfortable economy of small practical exchanges. One evening, Lily had looked at the two of them from across the dinner table with an expression that was clearly the expression of someone thinking something they had decided not to say. Clara had caught it, had looked away, had felt something in her chest that she decided not to name. Lily had said, instead, "Dad, can I get a dog?" Ethan had said no. The conversation had moved on, but Clara had thought about that look later, in her car, in the dark. She had thought, she sees it, and then he doesn't. In February, Ethan's colleague Marcus took him to lunch and told him, with the directness of a man who had known Ethan since graduate school and could therefore get away with it, that he should start dating again. "It's been 6 years, Marcus said. He said it the way you say a fact that has been sitting on the table between two people for a long time and has finally gotten too heavy to ignore. Ethan ate his sandwich. "I'm fine. I didn't say you weren't fine. I said you should start dating. Those aren't different statements." Marcus looked at him. "You're 38. You've got a daughter who's going to be out of the house in 4 years. And then what, you're going to come home to that house by yourself and eat sandwiches and watch the History Channel until you're 70. I like the History Channel. Ethan set down his sandwich. He thought about it for a moment, genuinely considered the proposition. In the way he considered all propositions, by running it through some internal assessment. Then he said, "I don't need more people in my life, Marcus. I have enough. You have me. And you have Lily. And you have that woman from the clinic. Clara. Right. who you somehow see 3 times a week and have never once. As far as I can tell, we're friends." Ethan's voice was neutral but final. "She's Lily's friend." "That's what it is." Marcus looked at him for a long moment, with the expression of a man choosing his battles. "Okay," he said. "Okay. I'm just saying. 6 years is a long time. I know how long it's been." The conversation ended there, and Ethan drove back to the office and spent the afternoon doing calculations, and he did not think about what Marcus had said, or rather, he decided not to, which was a different thing, though he didn't examine the difference. Clara, who had been picking up Lily from school that day because Ethan had a late meeting, a thing that happened occasionally, practically, without drama, heard about the lunch conversation from Lily, who had overheard Ethan telling it to a friend on the phone that night, in a way that was clearly meant to be heard. Or perhaps wasn't meant to be heard at all. "Dad said he doesn't need more people," Lily told Clara, in the car, looking out the window. Clara said, "He's happy with what he has." "That's not the same as not needing more," Lily said. She was 13 then. Clara looked at her sideways and thought, "You are going to be an extraordinary adult." "No," Clara agreed. "It's not the same thing." They drove in silence for a moment. "Clara," Lily said, "do you need more people?" Clara kept her eyes on the road. "I have enough," she said. And the answer was honest and also not quite honest. And she was aware of both of these things simultaneously. She had turned down another invitation that week, a man named Patrick who worked at the hospital and was, by any reasonable assessment, kind and interested in her. She had told him she was busy. She had told herself she wasn't ready. She had sat in her apartment that night, in the quiet that was different from Ethan's quiet. His quiet was inhabited, populated with the small sounds of a living house, while hers was simply empty, and she had thought about the word waiting, and whether patience was a virtue, or just a more dignified word for fear. She had not reached a conclusion. She had fallen asleep on the couch, with the lamp on, and woken at 2 in the morning, with a crick in her neck, and the quiet thought that she should probably start making different decisions. She had not made any different decisions. It was a Wednesday in October. The maple in Ethan's backyard had gone the full range of red, the kind of red that looked like a decision, like something the tree had been working toward all year. Clara had noticed it when she came in through the back gate, and she'd stood there for a moment just looking at it, while Lily waved at her from the kitchen window. Dinner had been easy. It was usually easy now. They had all learned the language of this particular space, its rhythms, and its small customs. Lily had made pasta, badly but enthusiastically, and Ethan had made the sauce, and Clara had set the table and opened the wine, and somehow they had all eaten and talked and laughed, and it had been exactly the kind of ordinary evening that Clara had learned to hold carefully, because she knew better than to hold it too tight. Then Lily had gone to bed, and Clara had stayed to help with dishes, because that was what you did, and somewhere between the rinsing and the drying, she had started crying, not dramatically. It came the way honest crying sometimes came, without announcement, without build-up. Just suddenly there, filling the space between one breath and the next. Her mother had called that afternoon. Her parents were separating after 38 years, with the quiet exhaustion of 2 people who had decided that whatever had held them together had run out, and they were going to be very adult and civil about the whole thing. Her mother had said, "I just wanted you to know, sweetheart." As if it were a minor update. As if it weren't the architecture of Clara's entire childhood, disassembling itself in the span of a phone call. She had held it together all day. She was good at that. She was not holding it together now. Ethan turned from the sink. He took one look at her and said nothing, which was the right thing to say. He handed her a dish towel, not for dishes, just something to hold, and leaned back against the counter and waited in the way he had of waiting, which was steady and without demand. She told him about her parents. She didn't tell it well. It came out sideways, in fragments. The way things came out when you were crying about one thing, and also, underneath it, crying about several other things you hadn't given yourself permission to name. She said something about 38 years not being enough. About how you could do everything right and still run out. About not knowing what things lasted. Ethan listened. When she finished, The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, the wind moved through the maple. He said, "They're going to be okay, and so are you." "I know," she said. "I know that, but knowing doesn't make it feel different." "No." She looked at him. "No, it doesn't." There was a pause. In the pause, the particular quality of the quiet in that kitchen was something Clara would remember later. Would replay in detail the way the overhead light caught the edge of his face, the wet dish towel in her hands, the sense of being very, very close to something without knowing what it was. And then Ethan, in the tone of someone who was trying to give her something lighter, said, "Maybe you should just marry me." It landed in the silence. Clara stopped. She did not laugh. She had been about to the setup, had all the signals of a joke. His voice had the right lightness. It was clearly meant as here, take this easier thing instead of the heavy thing. But something intervened between the impulse and the action, some circuit that knew better. She looked at him. He looked back. And she watched something shift in his face, the shift of a man who has said a thing, and is now, for the first time, hearing it. "Clara, I should go," she said, quietly. Without drama, she set the dish towel down on the counter, and picked up her jacket from the chair, and said good night in a voice that was perfectly steady. And she went out through the back door, and she walked home through the cold October dark, and she did not cry again until she was inside with the door shut behind her. She did not call anyone. She sat on her kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet and thought, "That's what it feels like, to hear something you've been waiting for, said in a way that means nothing." And then she thought, or maybe it means something and I'm too afraid to find out which. She went to bed without deciding. She woke up and still had not decided. She did not text him the next morning. She always texted him, usually before 8, something small. Something about Lily's schedule, or a link to something she'd read, or just a response to whatever thread they'd been in the night before. The thread was still there. She didn't respond to it. She saw Lily's name on her phone screen twice that week. Once a call she let go to voicemail. Once a text she responded to briefly, practically, without the warmth she usually put into it. She felt bad about that. She knew it wasn't Lily's fault. She worked. She slept. She called her mother once and her father once, separately, in the careful bilateral diplomacy of adult children with separating parents. She did not go to Ethan's for dinner. The following Wednesday, the drawing Wednesday, the one she and Lily had maintained without interruption for nearly a year, she texted Lily to say she had a shift running late. She did not have a shift running late. She stood in her apartment and looked at her own reflection in the dark window and did not particularly like what she saw, which was a woman retreating because she was frightened and doing it in the exact way she had always judged as cowardly when she saw it in other people. She understood the irony. She had spent 3 years waiting with patience and steadiness, holding herself to a standard of dignity she was quietly proud of. And now at the moment when the thing she'd waited for had appeared, however accidentally, however ambiguously she was hiding, in her apartment, from a man who had said 5 words that she was analyzing like a text with multiple possible translations. She knew the translation she wanted it to have. That was exactly the problem, because if she went back, if she walked through his back gate and sat at his kitchen table and laughed at something Lily said, she would have to sit across from him knowing what she'd felt when he said those words. And she wasn't sure she could do that and maintain the comfortable pretense of friendship. And the comfortable pretense of friendship was the thing that had kept her close to him for 3 years. To give it up meant gambling on something that might not be reciprocal. She was a person who understood odds. She worked in pediatric medicine, where you got very good at reading situations for what they were, rather than what you hoped they'd be. She did not have good odds here, and she was afraid. She stayed away anyway. Ethan noticed on the second day. He noticed the missing text. He glanced at his phone in the morning and realized he had been, without thinking about it, waiting for it. The absence was small but distinct. Like a door you've always heard. Close now. Not closing. He told himself it was nothing. By the end of the week, it was clearly not nothing. The dinner Wednesday came and went without Clara, for the first time in 8 months. Lily sat at the table and looked at the third place setting that Ethan had automatically put out and then removed. And she said nothing, which was louder than if she'd said something. "Did something happen?" Lily asked. "On Saturday morning, over cereal." "What do you mean?" Lily gave him the look, the one she'd inherited from Rebecca. The one that said, "I know you know what I mean. Please don't make me explain it." With Clara. "I don't know," Ethan said, and that was honest. He set down his coffee and thought about the kitchen and the dish towel and what he'd said, and he ran it through his internal assessment, and the assessment came back inconclusive, which was unusual. "I think I might have said something wrong." "What did you say?" He paused. "I made a joke." It wasn't a good time for a joke. Lily was quiet for a moment, eating her cereal. Then she said, "What was the joke?" "It doesn't matter." "Okay." She ate another spoonful. She seemed sad when she left. "I watched from my window." Ethan looked at his daughter. "You were supposed to be asleep. I was going to get water." She shrugged, perfectly unbothered. She stopped at the sidewalk for a minute before she kept walking. Like she was deciding something. He sat with that image longer than he intended. The house felt different that week. He tried to identify why the house was the same. The routine was the same. The small procedural facts of his daily life were unchanged. And yet, the kitchen felt it most. He stood at the window with his coffee on Tuesday morning and tried to account for the cold in it and couldn't, except to note that the cold was not the temperature and had nothing to do with October. He had not known, until she wasn't there, how much space she occupied. Marcus came by on Friday evening, unannounced, which was within the rights of a friendship that was 20 years old, and brought beer, which was the customary apology for unannounced visits. They sat on the back porch. The maple was past its peak, now some of the leaves had come down. And the backyard was the particular kind of beautiful that only happened in the moment, before something ended. Ethan told him what had happened. He was sparse about it, the way he was sparse about everything personal, but Marcus had known him long enough to read the silences. Marcus was quiet for a while after. Then he said, "Ethan, how long has Clara been in your life?" 5 years. "And in that 5 years, how many times has she not been there when Lily needed her?" Ethan thought about it. "Never." "How many times has she taken something from you?" "She's never." "How many times has she asked you to be something you're not?" Ethan didn't answer. "She's been there," Marcus said. "For 5 years. Not because you asked her to be. Not because you gave her anything. Just because she chose to be." He drank his beer. "You know why she hasn't dated anyone in 3 years?" Ethan went very still. "How do you know that?" "Because I talked to Diane, who's her friend. Because Diane is married to Tom, who I golf with. And Tom told Diane that you came up in conversation, and Diane, who apparently has opinions about this situation, told me." Marcus paused. "She's been waiting for you." "Not obviously. Not in a way that puts any pressure on you. Just, she chose you. Quietly. A long time ago." The porch was very quiet. She could have Ethan started, then stopped. "What?" "Said something?" "To a man who has told everyone who will listen that he's fine. He has enough. He doesn't need anyone." Marcus looked at him steadily. "She's not a fool, Ethan. She's a woman who understands that you can't push someone towards something they haven't decided to want." The rope swing moved slightly in the wind at the far end of the yard. Ethan thought about 5 years. About the soup when Lily was sick, the drawings on Wednesday evenings, the car in the driveway that he'd unconsciously started watching for, the way the kitchen felt like itself when she was in it, and like something else when she wasn't. He thought about how he had been, for 5 years, receiving something warmth, steadiness, care without ever asking what it cost her. He had thought he was protecting himself by not looking. He had not considered that the not looking was its own kind of choice. That it had consequences for people other than himself. "I don't know how to do this," he said. His voice was quiet and undefended. "I know," Marcus said. "I don't want to." He stopped. The sentence had multiple endings. I don't want to lose her. I don't want to hurt her. I don't want to start something and fail at it. They were all true. They were also not reasons. She deserves better than someone who doesn't know what they want, he said. Maybe, Marcus said. Or maybe she deserves the truth, which is that you know exactly what you want, and you're just afraid of it. He couldn't sleep that night. He lay in the dark and let himself think about things he had been, for 6 years, not thinking about. About what it meant to love someone and then lose them. About the particular arithmetic of grief, how it didn't decrease so much as it changed shape, moving from acute to structural, from the unbearable present tense of loss to the duller, more manageable ache of something that had become part of how you were built. About Rebecca, he hadn't stopped loving her. He would never stop. That was not the question. The question, the one he had refused to ask himself because the asking felt like a betrayal, was whether loving her and losing her meant he was required to be done. Whether the cost of having loved was that you were obligated to stop. He thought, she would think this is ridiculous. He thought it clearly, with the clarity that came sometimes in the dark. The clarity that was closest to honesty. Rebecca, who had laughed at him when he overthought things, who had said, Ethan, you would engineer a sandwich if you could, just eat it. She would have looked at him lying in the dark, running risk assessments on his own heart, and found it both endearing and infuriating. You're allowed, she would have said. That had been her phrase for things. You're allowed. He heard Lily in the hallway at 2 a.m. She was getting water. She'd been honest about that, and she paused outside his door. In that way she had of checking on him without knocking. Dad. Her voice was quiet. Are you awake? Yeah. A pause. Then she opened the door, a crack. Just enough to see him in the dark. Or for him to see her. Are you okay? I'm thinking. About Clara? He breathed for a moment. About a lot of things. Lily was quiet. Then she said, with the precision of someone who had spent 14 years in the company of a careful man and had learned to be direct. If you don't do something about it, she's going to go. Not right now, but eventually, she'll start making different choices, and then she'll be gone. I know, he said. She's been there for a long time, Dad. A pause. I don't want her to go. I know that too. Another pause. I think, Lily said carefully, that you stopped looking for things because you were scared of losing them again, but you've already kind of lost her, and you didn't even. She stopped, reconsidered. You didn't even try. Ethan lay still in the dark. I know, he said, for the 3rd time. Lily said good night. He heard her padded footsteps go back to her room. He heard the creak of the hallway floorboard, the one that always talked even when no one was listening. He lay there until the light outside the window shifted from black to the deep blue that meant almost morning. And then he got up, not because he had resolved his fear. He hadn't. The fear was exactly where it had always been, that particular cold, specific terror of choosing someone and then having them taken. He understood now that the fear was not going to resolve. It was not a problem he could engineer a solution for. It was simply something he was going to have to carry alongside the choice. The way you carried anything that mattered. He got dressed. He made coffee. He stood at the kitchen window and watched the oak tree and the rope swing and thought, you've already lost her. And you didn't even try. He picked up his phone. He texted her at 7:15 in the morning. He thought for a long time about what to say. He deleted 3 versions. He finally sent, can I come by this afternoon? Not a question about Lily's schedule. Just, can I come by? She read it at 7:42. He watched the typing indicator appear, disappear, appear again. Then, okay. He drove over at 3 o'clock. He parked on her street and sat in the car for 2 minutes, which was as much time as he allowed himself for things he was going to do regardless. She opened the door before he knocked. She was in weekend clothes, jeans, and a gray sweater, hair down, and she looked at him with the expression of someone who had prepared themselves to be calm and was committed to it. He said, can I come in? She stepped back and let him. They stood in her living room. It was the first time he'd been in her apartment, and he calculated nearly a year. It was the kind of space that reflected its occupant without performing it. Bookshelves that were actually used. A blanket on the couch that was clearly for use and not decoration. A coffee table with the rings of many mugs. On the windowsill, a row of small plants he didn't know the names of. A sketch pad on the kitchen table, open to a drawing he couldn't see from where he stood. He said, "What I said in the kitchen, Ethan, you don't have to." "I do." He said it steadily. "Let me." She went quiet. "When I said it, I meant it as a joke." "That's true, I want to be accurate with you." He looked at her directly. "But the thing is, I've thought about it every day since, and not in the way you think about something because it embarrassed you. In the other way." Clara did not move. "I've been telling myself for a long time that I'm fine," he said. "That I have enough. That I don't need." He stopped. Started again. "I've been very careful, very deliberate, about not looking at you in a way that would make things complicated, because you matter to Lily and you matter to he paused. You matter to me, and I thought that protecting the arrangement was the same as protecting you." He shook his head. "It wasn't. I was protecting myself, and I was taking what you offered, your time, your steadiness, he gestured. A small motion that meant all of it, the soup and the drawings and the evenings, without asking what it cost you. That was selfish in a quiet way. And I'm sorry for that." Clara's breathing had changed. He could see it, the slight change in the rise and fall of her chest, the way she was holding herself very still, as if stillness would protect her from whatever came next. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I want to be honest with you about that. I know how to build things that hold weight. I know how to calculate load and failure points. I don't know." He stopped. "Let the honesty sit there. I'm not promising to be easy. I'm not promising I won't be bad at this sometimes." He took a breath. "But I'm not joking this time. And I'm not going to pretend I don't know what this is." The room was quiet for a long moment. Clara said, "I don't need easy." Her voice was quiet too, but it had a foundation. "I know that," he said. "I think that's part of why I kept." He stopped again. There were too many endings to that sentence, and he didn't trust himself with all of them yet. She looked at him. Her eyes were the particular brown that he had noticed, without intending to, approximately 400 times over 5 years. She said, "I'm not going to pretend I haven't been waiting. Because I have. And I'm not going to pretend that it hasn't cost me something. Because it has." She said it without accusation, the way she said most things clearly, with a steadiness that was not coldness, but something more durable than warmth alone. "But I'm also not going to pretend that I regret it. Because I don't." Ethan stood in her living room with the October light coming through the window and thought, "This is what it feels like to be exactly as afraid as you actually are. And to do the thing anyway." "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. It was not a love scene. There was no embrace, no sweeping moment. He stayed for an hour. They talked about her parents, about his fear, about the strange 5 years they'd been in together and separately, about the fact that Lily was clearly going to be insufferably smug about this. Clara made a tia. He sat on her couch, next to the blanket that was actually for use, and felt the specific and unfamiliar relief of a thing no longer being avoided. He drove home at 4:30. He sat in the driveway for a moment. He was afraid. He was still afraid. He went inside anyway. No one made an announcement. Lily figured it out on her own, she always did, when Clara came for dinner the following Wednesday, and there was a different quality to the air in the kitchen, a difference she couldn't have named but registered immediately, the way certain people register changes in atmospheric pressure. She looked at her father. He was handing Clara a glass of wine, and she was laughing at something he'd said. And the laugh was easy in a way it had always been, but also different in a way that Lily, at 14, was old enough to understand. Lily said nothing. She went back to the pasta. Later, when Clara was helping with dishes, the same sink, the same ordinary choreography, Lily wandered through the kitchen in the direction of the refrigerator and said, casually, to no one in particular, "I was thinking we should go apple picking next weekend." All three of us. Ethan looked at the back of her head. Since when do you like apple picking? I've always liked apple picking. You called it the most boring possible use of a Saturday in September. I've grown. Clara was smiling at the sink. She didn't turn around. Sure, Ethan said. Apple picking. Great. Lily took her apple juice from the refrigerator and returned to her room with the contained satisfaction of a person whose plan had succeeded. They heard her door close. Clara turned around. Her expression was the expression of someone suppressing something. She is absolutely going to hold this over us, Ethan said. Indefinitely, Clara agreed. He looked at her. She looked at him. The kitchen was exactly its regular size, exactly its regular temperature, lit by exactly its regular light. It did not feel like what it had felt like 3 weeks ago. Something had been restored. Not the same as before. It was not the same. It was built on what had come before, but it was different in the way that things are different when they've been acknowledged, when the shape of them has been named. The weeks that followed were quiet. Deliberately, gratefully quiet. They had their first actual date. Ethan called it a date, which cost him something, and also cost him nothing, at a small restaurant downtown on a Thursday evening. While Lily was at a friend's house, they were both slightly awkward in the way that 5-year friendships become awkward when they change shape. And then they were not awkward, because they were fundamentally themselves, and themselves was something they already knew. He learned that she cried at documentaries about migration, not in a self-conscious way, but in the undefended way of someone who had simply stopped being embarrassed about it. She learned that he had a habit of narrating small home repairs under his breath, a running commentary that he was apparently not aware he was doing. She told him about her first real relationship, at 24, which had ended when she'd understood that she wanted steadiness and he'd wanted momentum, and the two were not compatible. He told her, in pieces, over several conversations, about Rebecca, not the grief, which she already knew the shape of, but the person, the specifics. Her laugh, her running commentary on his overthinking, the way she'd always known when to push and when to give him room. Clara listened to all of this without trying to fill the spaces. He loved her for that. He was aware now that he loved her, and the awareness was not terrifying in the way he'd expected. It was present, and that was enough. He did not say the word yet. He was working toward it, in the way he worked toward most things carefully, with structural attention to the foundation. But he thought it. In the mornings, standing at the kitchen window, when her car appeared on his street, when he heard Lily in the hallway at night, and thought about the two of them sleeping at opposite ends of the house, and thought about what a house was for. He thought it quietly and often, and with the simple, durable quality of something that had been true for a long time, had just been waiting for him to stop arguing with it. One Sunday in November, Clara came over to help Lily with a school project that had gotten out of hand, a diorama representing a biome, which had expanded to include hand-painted miniature animals and a functional water feature that Lily had insisted on and that threatened to short out on the dining room table. Ethan fixed the water feature. Clara painted a miniature heron. Lily directed both of them and expressed opinions about the colors with the authority of someone whose project this technically was, and whose biome diorama was clearly going to be the best in the class, which she did not say, but which everyone in the room understood. There was something right about the three of them in that particular configuration, Lily at the center of the table issuing instructions, Ethan on one side solving the mechanical problem, Clara on the other making the small painted creature more beautiful than the assignment required. The light in the dining room was warm. Somewhere outside, the November wind moved through the bare branches of the oak tree. Ethan looked up from the water pump mechanism and caught Clara's eye across the table. She was concentrating on the heron's wing. She had a small streak of gray paint on the back of her left hand that she didn't know was there. He looked back down at the pump. He thought, there it is. At some point in the evening, Clara went upstairs to use the bathroom. When she came back down, she set her jacket on the chair in the corner, the chair where she'd left it before. When she came for dinner, and she set something else next to it, a toothbrush, in a small travel case, set next to her jacket, matter-of-factly. Ethan saw it when he went to get his own jacket to take the dog, that did not exist, for a walk. he was suddenly inventing in order to have a moment to stand in the driveway and breathe through the feeling in his chest. He stopped, looked at it. Lily appeared in the hallway, heading to get her phone charger, and glanced at the toothbrush and then at her father. She said nothing. She went back to her room. Ethan stood in the hallway for a long moment, with his jacket in his hand, and the specific, absolute clarity of a man who understood exactly what a toothbrush meant when someone placed it in your house with that particular quality of casualness. Not a declaration, not a demand, just a thing set down, in a space where it belonged, by someone who had decided quietly, in the way she decided everything, to stop treating her own presence as provisional. He put his jacket back on the hook. He went back to the dining room, where Clara was explaining to Lily that the heron's wing feathers needed a second coat, and Lily was arguing that one coat was architecturally sufficient, and Clara was explaining patiently that architecture and painting were governed by different standards, and Lily was not conceding the point, but was also picking up her brush. He sat down at the table. Nobody said anything about the toothbrush. Nobody needed to. Outside, the maple in the backyard had dropped its last leaves. The rope swing hung still in the cold November air, and the crow had not been on the fence post in weeks. The oak tree stood bare and patient against the dark sky. The way certain things stood, having weathered what needed weathering, still present, waiting for spring, with a confidence that did not require announcement. The kitchen light was on. Inside, someone laughed. This time, no one was joking, and no one needed to say another word.